Alexander Jannaeus was king of Hasmonean kingdom from 103 BC to 76 BC during the Hasmonean dynasty. The son of John Hyrcanus, he inherited the throne from his brother Aristobulus I, and appears to have married his brother's widow, Shlomtjanor, Shelomit, also known as Salome Alexandra, according to the biblical law of Yibum, although Josephus is inexplicit on that point. Since Alexander Jannaeus was a high priest, he was technically breaking Jewish law according to the laws in Leviticus. The laws in Leviticus state that a Jewish high priest is forbidden to marry a widow. The law in Leviticus would have taken precedence over the biblical law in Deuteronomy that allowed the marriage of a non-high priest individual to a childless brother's widow. His likely full Hebrew name was Jonathan. He may have been the high priest Jonathan, rather than his great-uncle of the same name, who established the Mesida fortress. Under the name of King Jannaeus, he appears as a wicked tyrant in the Talmud, reflecting his conflict with the Pharisee party. He is among the more colorful historical figures, despite being little known outside specialized history. He and his widow had a substantial impact on the subsequent development of Judaism. Family. Alexander Jannaeus was the third son of John Hyrcanus by his second wife. When Aristobulus I, Hyrcanus' son by his first wife, became king, he deemed it necessary for his own security to imprison his half-brother. Aristobulus died after a reign of 1 year. Upon his death, his widow, Salome Alexandra, had Alexander and his brothers released from prison. Alexander, as the oldest living brother, had the right not only to the throne but also to Salome, the widow of his deceased brother, who had died childless, and, although she was 13 years older than he married her. By her, he had 2 sons. The eldest, Hyrcanus II, became high priest in 62 BC, and Aristobulus II, who was high priest from 66–62 BC, and started a bloody civil war with his brother, ending in his capture by Pompey the Great. Conquests. During the 27-year reign of Alexander Jannaeus, he was almost constantly involved in military conflict. International factors at the time created an environment suitable for Jannaeus' conquests. First, Jannaeus received support from Cleopatra III of Egypt. This support was particularly crucial during the war with Ptolemy Lathyrus. Ultimately, conflict in the Roman Republic was the greatest outside influence on Judean military campaigns. Political instability in Rome led to a civil war beginning in 88 BC. With Rome chiefly concerned with the tumultuous domestic predicament, Jannaeus was free to expand the Judean state. War with Ptolemy Lathyrus. Alexander's first expedition was against the polis of Ptolemies. This campaign seems to have been well-timed politically, as the weak Seleucid Empire was unable to intervene. Help came to the citizens of Ptolemais from Ptolemy Lathyrus, who had been cast out by his mother, Cleopatra III, and had founded a kingdom in Cyprus. Ptolemy landed a large army for the relief of the town, but Alexander met him with treachery, arranging an alliance with him openly while secretly he sought to obtain the help of his mother against him. As soon as Ptolemy learned of this intrigue, he marched against Asychus, near Sepphoris, which he captured, together with 10,000 prisoners and much plunder. A similar attack upon Sepphoris failed, but in a later battle at Azophon on the Jordan, Alexander with his whole army suffered a defeat at the hands of a much smaller force. Alexander allowed the enemy to cross the river unimpeded, in order that, as he thought, he might more easily catch it between his army and the stream. He saw his error only when it was too late. The enemy fell upon the Jewish camp. Women and children were struck down, their corpses were hacked to pieces, flung into cauldrons and boiled, so that the people thought they were dealing with cannibals. This act was used to terrify the Judean people and the military. Alexander might easily have lost his crown and Judea its independence as the result of this battle, had it not been for the assistance extended by Egypt. Cleopatra's 2 Jewish generals, Helkias and Ananias, persuaded the queen of the dangers of allowing her banished son Ptolemy to remain victorious, and she entrusted them with an army against him. As a result, Ptolemy was forced to withdraw to Cyprus, and Alexander was saved. The Egyptians, as compensation for their aid, desired to annex Judea to their country, but considerations touching the resident Egyptian Jews, who were the main support of her throne, induced Cleopatra to modify her longings for conquest. The Egyptian army withdrawn, Alexander found his hands free, and forthwith he planned new campaigns. Later campaigns Alexander captured Gadara and the strong fortress Amathus on the Jordan, but, in an ambush set for him by Theodorus, ruler of Amathus, he lost the whole of the rear guard of his army, 10,000 men, together with his baggage. He was more successful in his expedition against the Hellenized coastal cities, capturing Raphia and Anthedon. Finally, in 96 BC, Jannaeus outlasted the inhabitants of Gaza in a year-long siege, which he occupied through treachery, and gave up to be pillaged and burnt by his soldiery. This victory gained Judean control over the Mediterranean outlet for the Nabatean trade routes. High priesthood. The relations between Alexander and the Pharisees were probably never very cordial, though, according to the statement of the Talmud, Simeon ben Shetich, the head of the party, was a brother of the queen and a frequent guest at the palace. The rival Sadducees were avid supporters of Jannaeus. Furthermore, Jannaeus established himself as a ruler concerned mainly with conquest rather than his religious obligations. One year during the Jewish holiday of Sukkot or Feast of Tabernacles, Alexander Jannaeus, while officiating as the high priest at the temple in Jerusalem, demonstrated his support of the Sadducees by refusing to perform the water libation ceremony properly. Instead of pouring it on the altar, he poured it on his feet. The crowd responded with shock at his mockery and showed their displeasure by pelting Alexander with the etrogim that they were holding in their hands. Unwittingly, the crowd had played right into Alexander's hands. He had intended to incite the people to riot, and his soldiers fell upon the crowd at his command. The soldiers slew more than 6,000 people in the temple courtyard. This incident during the Feast of Tabernacles was a major factor leading up to the Judean Civil War by igniting popular opponents of Jannaeus. A Qumran document sheds further light on another opponent of Jannaeus. The scroll 4Q390 was written by an adversary of Jannaeus seeking popular support to overthrow the Hasmonean king. The author called for an end to the dispute between Jannaeus and the Pharisees. According to the author, the only acceptable solution was an end to the Hasmonean priesthood and secular control. This opposition culminated in the Judean Civil War. Judean Civil War and the crucifixion of the 800. The Judean Civil War initially began after the conquest of Gaza by Jannaeus. Due to Jannaeus' victory at Gaza, the Nabatean kingdom no longer controlled their main trade route to Rome. Therefore, Nabatean king Obodas I launched an attack on Judea in the Golan Heights. After Jannaeus was defeated in battle against Obodas, he returned to fierce Jewish opposition in Jerusalem. A civil war broke out between Pharisee-supported Jewish rebels and Jannaeus. Overall, the war lasted 6 years and left 50,000 Judeans dead. After Jannaeus succeeded early in the war, the rebels asked for Seleucid assistance. Judean insurgents joined forces with Demetrius III Eucharius to fight against Jannaeus. The Seleucid forces defeated Jannaeus at Shechem and forced him to take refuge in the mountains. However, these Judean rebels ultimately decided that it was better to live under a terrible Jewish king than backtrack to a Seleucid ruler. After 6,000 Jews returned to Jannaeus, Demetrius was defeated. The end of the civil war brought a sense of national solidarity against Seleucid influence. Nevertheless, Jannaeus was uninterested in reconciliation within the Judean state. The aftermath of the Judean Civil War consisted of popular unrest, poverty and grief over the fallen soldiers on both sides. The greatest impact of the war was the victor's revenge. Josephus reports that Jannaeus brought 800 rebels to Jerusalem and had them crucified, and had the throats of the rebels' wives and children cut before their eyes as Jannaeus ate with his concubines. Coinage. The coinage of Alexander Jannaeus is characteristic of the early Jewish coinage in that it avoided human or animal representations, in opposition to the surrounding Greek, and later Roman types of the period. Jewish coinage instead focused on symbols, either natural, such as the palm tree, the pomegranate or the star, or man-made, such as the temple, the menorah, trumpets or cornucopia. Alexander Jannaeus was the first of the Jewish kings to introduce the 8-ray star, or 8-spoked wheel, symbol, in his bronze, widow's mite, coins, in combination with the widespread Seleucid numismatic symbol of the anchor. Depending on the make, the star symbol can be shown with straight spokes connected to the outside circle, in a style rather indicative of a wheel. On others, the spokes can have a more flame-like shape, more indicative of the representation of a star within a diadem. It is not clear what the wheel or star may exactly symbolize, and interpretations vary, from the morning star, to the sun or the heavens. The influence of some Persian symbols of a star within a diadem, or the 8-spoked Buddhist wheel have also been suggested. The 8-spoked Macedonian star, emblem of the royal Argead dynasty and the ancient kingdom of Macedonia, within a Hellenistic diadem symbolizing royalty, seem to be the most probable source for this symbol. The most likely explanation is that the symbol is a star encased in a diadem and it is a religious explanation. Biblical law forbids the making of graven images, yet the image of a monarch is a staple of Hellenistic coins, in place of an image of himself. Therefore, it is likely that Alexander Jannaeus chose a star, in keeping with Numbers chapter 24 verse 17. A star rises from Jacob, a scepter comes forth from Israel. This verse generally was seen as a biblical support for monarchy. Jannaeus, however, could have seen it as an image of his achievements, if not his own rule. This is how the rest of Numbers chapter 24 verse 17 and verses 18 and 19 continue. The star, it says, smashes the brow of Moab, the foundation of all children of Seth. Edom becomes a possession, yea, a possession of its enemies, but Israel is triumphant. A victor issues from Jacob to wipe out what is left of Ir, considering Jannaeus' conquests, creating a kingdom that rivaled those of David and Solomon and may have even exceeded those. The star, envisioned in the prophecy of Balaam in Numbers, was a perfect match for him. In literature, Alexander Jannaeus is the main character of the novel The King of Flesh and Blood, by Israeli novelist Moshe Shamir, a novel including many hints to the politics of 1950s Israel, when it was written. As the husband of Queen Salome Alexandra, he is also a character in the novel Queen of the Jews by Judy Petsonk. Alexander Jannaeus and his wife Queen Alexandra are the main characters of Constantine Cavafy's poem bearing their names. In the poem, Cavafy notes the Hellenistic influence on the behavior of the couple.